The dust swirled around the old gas station pumps, kicked up by a wind that smelled faintly of distant rain and sun-baked asphalt. This was quiet country. The kind of quiet where the cicadas sounded like a roaring engine and the silence between them felt vast and deep. Here, off the main highway, time seemed to slow, measured only by the rising and setting sun, and the infrequent rumble of a vehicle. Elias Thorne was part of that quiet. He ran this station, a relic of a different era, nestled among rolling hills and scrub brush. His hands, gnarled and strong, wiped down the counter with practiced ease. His face was a roadmap of years, etched with sun and experiences he rarely spoke of. Most folks who stopped here saw only a man in his late 60s, perhaps a bit worn, but steady and polite. His uniform, such as it was, simple work pants, a faded blue shirt, and a slightly worn cap that bore a discreet emblem, spoke of honest labor, not of the man underneath. He moved with a deliberate economy of motion, his gaze missing nothing, yet seeming to see only the task at hand. He checked the oil levels on a customer's pickup, his movements precise, efficient. The customer, a farmer named Thomas, chatted about the dry spell. Elias nodded, offering a few quiet words of agreement, his eyes scanning the horizon, a habit ingrained so deeply he was barely aware of it anymore. This life, this quiet solitude broken by brief, friendly exchanges, was what he had built after everything else. He had found a measure of peace here, a place where the world felt simple again: fill the tank, check the oil, sell a soda, wipe the counter. No complex equations, no life or death decisions resting solely on his shoulders. Just the hum of the refrigerators and the distant sigh of the wind. He watched Thomas drive away, the pickup kicking up more dust. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretched and distorted the familiar landscape. A good day. A quiet day. The quiet shattered moments later. It wasn't the normal sound of a vehicle. It was a low, guttural growl, multiplied and amplified, a pack of predators approaching. Elias's head came up, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. 6 motorcycles, loud and gleaming, roared into the station lot. They were big, customized bikes, and the men riding them were just as imposing. Leather, denim, patches, and a swagger that announced their presence like a challenge. The leader killed his engine first, the sudden silence amplifying the idling thunder of the others. He was a mountain of a man, bearded, with cruel eyes and a patch on his cut that Elias recognized with a sigh he kept carefully internal. The Iron Vultures. A regional gang known for throwing their weight around, leaning on small businesses, and generally making life miserable for anyone who didn't show them sufficient deference. They were trouble, distilled and riding on chrome. The others cut their engines, the silence pressing in, heavy with anticipation. 6 pairs of eyes swept over the station, over Elias. A couple of the younger ones grinned, showing gaps in their teeth. The big leader, the one whose patch read "Hammer," swung a leg over his bike and sauntered towards the entrance, his boots crunching on the gravel. His gaze locked onto Elias, standing calm behind the counter. Hammer stopped a few feet away, scanning Elias up and down. He lingered on the faded cap Elias wore. Elias kept his expression neutral, hands clasped loosely on the counter. He met Hammer's stare without flinching, without fear, just quiet observation. Hammer chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "Well now, looky here," he said, his voice a rough growl that carried easily in the sudden quiet. "Fancy place you got, old-timer." Elias inclined his head slightly. "It serves its purpose. Fuel, supplies." Another biker, younger and leaner, with a sneer etched permanently on his face, swaggered up beside Hammer. "Purpose," the younger one, known as Shiv, echoed, spitting on the ground near the entrance. "Looks like a dying dog, more like," the others laughed. Hammer's eyes returned to Elias's cap. He reached out a thick finger, pointing. "What's that? Some kinda little club?" He squinted. "Says Marine Corps veteran." "Ha! You were a jarhead, old man." Elias didn't react to the tone, or the insult. I served. Hammer threw his head back and roared with laughter, a sound completely devoid of humor. Shiv and the others joined in, slapping each other on the back. Served. Hammer wiped a tear from his eye. In what? The mess hall. Polishing boots. He stepped closer, his voice dropping slightly, though still loud enough for his crew to hear. Look, old man. We're the vultures. We ride this territory. And folks in our territory, they pay respects. They pay protection. And you look like you ain't paid nothing. Elias's gaze remained steady. I pay my taxes. I don't pay bullies. The laughter stopped abruptly. Hammer's face darkened. He leaned forward, putting his hands flat on the counter, his eyes cold. Bullies? That's a big word, old man. For a little man in a little uniform, he gestured to the cap again. That uniform don't mean nothing out here. Means less than nothing. He leaned in further, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. We run this road. We run this town. You're either with us, or you're roadkill. Shiv snickered, pulling out a pack of cigarettes and tapping one out. Elias looked past Hammer, at Shiv. He saw Shiv about to flick his cigarette but onto the clean floor near the entrance. Elias's hand, still clasped on the counter, moved fractionally. Pick that up, Elias said, his voice quiet, but carrying an absolute authority that cut through the tension. Shiv froze, the cigarette half to his mouth. Hammer straightened up, turning slightly. What did you say? Hammer asked, his voice laced with disbelief and rising anger. I said, Elias repeated, his eyes now locked onto Shiv, pick it up. Don't disrespect my place. Shiv stared, then burst out laughing again. Disrespect? I'll disrespect your face, Grandpa. He took a step forward, cigarette still in hand. It happened fast. Too fast for men expecting an old man to cower. Elias didn't move from behind the counter. His arm shot out, not a wild swing, but a precisely aimed, blindingly fast strike. His open palm caught Shiv square under the jaw. It wasn't a push, it was a whip-like snap, generating incredible force from a seemingly effortless motion. Shiv's head snapped back. His eyes glazed over, and he crumpled like a discarded rag doll, cigarette flying from his hand, hitting the ground near the door. He landed with a thud and lay still. Silence descended again, but this time it was sharp, shocked, filled with disbelief. Hammer stared at Shiv, then slowly turned his head back to Elias. His cruel eyes were wide, his jaw slack. The other vultures were equally stunned, their grins vanished, replaced by stunned fury. What the hell did you just do? Hammer whispered, his voice raw. Elias calmly brushed his hands together, as if dusting off lint. I told him not to disrespect my place, he said, his voice still quiet. He stepped out from behind the counter, moving with a fluid grace that belied his age. And I meant it. Hammer roared, a sound of pure rage. You little punk. He charged, a bull of a man, relying on brute force and intimidation. Elias didn't back away. He waited until Hammer was almost on him. Then, with the speed of a much younger man, he sidestepped the charge. As Hammer lumbered past, Elias drove a short, sharp elbow deep into the vulture leader's kidney. Hammer gasped, stumbling. Before he could recover, Elias spun, his movement tight and centered, and delivered a powerful, low kick to the back of Hammer's knee. The leg buckled. Hammer roared again, this time in pain, and went down hard on one knee, clutching his leg. The other 5 vultures snapped out of their shock. Get him, one yelled. They surged forward. Elias didn't engage them all at once. He moved, a blur of controlled motion. One biker swung a wild punch, Elias ducked under it, grabbing the man's wrist and using his momentum to twist, sending him spinning into the gas pumps with a yelp. Another tried to tackle him. Elias stepped aside, tripping him with a foot sweep, sending him sprawling onto the gravel. He didn't throw flashy kicks or punches. His movements were economical, precise, designed to disable quickly and efficiently. A palm heel strike to a nose, a quick jab to a solar plexus, a joint lock that sent a biker howling in pain before Elias let go, leaving him writhing. Within seconds, 3 more vultures were down, groaning or still recovering from Elias's sudden, devastating onslaught. Only 2 remained standing, wide-eyed and hesitant. They looked at their downed comrades, at the downed Hammer still trying to get up, and then at Elias, who stood calmly, breathing evenly, his posture relaxed but radiating an aura of quiet competence that was terrifying. The faded cap was still on his head. "Looks like your respect needs to be earned," Elias said, his voice carrying clearly in the silent lot. "You haven't earned any here." The remaining 2 vultures exchanged a frantic look. They didn't try to fight. They scrambled to their bikes, fumbling with the ignitions. Hammer, snarling in pain and humiliation, hobbled towards his own bike. Shiv was already stirring, moaning softly. Hammer managed to mount his bike. He glared at Elias, his face twisted with hatred. "You think this is over, old man," he spat. "You messed with the wrong people. You just made a war." Elias watched him, his expression unreadable. He didn't respond with threats. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, an old, sturdy flip phone, and calmly flipped it open. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry or scared. As Hammer and the remaining vultures roared their bikes to life and sped away, leaving a trail of dust and wounded pride, Elias Thorne, the quiet man in the faded cap, spoke into his phone. "Sergeant Major Thorne," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Requesting a status check. Code Echo Delta Sierra. Respond when able." Hammer's threat hung in the air, but Elias paid it no mind. He was already looking ahead, not at the retreating dust, but at the horizon. The quiet was gone. The war had begun. This was just the beginning. Hammer and his vultures, used to rolling over everyone, had just learned a harsh lesson about underestimating the quiet ones. They had mocked his uniform, his age, his seemingly simple life. They had mistaken peace for weakness. But they didn't know Elias Thorne. They didn't know the past held behind those calm eyes, the skills honed over decades of facing far worse than regional thugs. That faded cap wasn't just a memento, it was a symbol of a history they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Their humiliation at the hands of one man, an old man they thought was an easy mark, would fuel their rage. They would regroup, gather more men, plan their retaliation. They wouldn't rest until they had crushed him, made an example of him. They would see him not just as an obstacle, but as an existential threat to their carefully built reputation for dominance and fear. And Elias knew it. He wasn't naive. This wasn't a simple bar fight, it was a declaration of war by a gang that operated on intimidation and brutality. They wouldn't stop until he was broken. But neither would he. The peace he had found here was worth fighting for. And he wasn't alone. That call he just made? It wasn't to the local sheriff, who was likely either corrupt or too overwhelmed to handle the vultures. It was a call to a different kind of force. A force that understood commitment, loyalty, and decisive action. A force that responded to Sergeant Major Thorne. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elias stood in his gas station lot, looking at the dust settling where the motorcycles had been. Shiv was sitting up now, holding his jaw, looking dazed and terrified. The other 3 were slowly picking themselves up. They were defeated for now, but not broken. Not yet. Elias walked over to Shiv, extending a hand. Shiv flinched, but Elias's grip was gentle as he helped him up. "Next time," Elias said, his voice low, "show some respect." Shiv, wide-eyed, just nodded mutely, his arrogance completely gone. He scrambled towards his bike, eager to escape. Elias watched them all limp away, their bike starting reluctantly, their departure ignominious. The silence returned, heavier than before, pregnant with the promise of violence. He walked back inside the station, locked the door. He looked around his small, simple world. It was clean, well organized. It was his. And he would defend it. He sat down on a stool behind the counter, the flip phone still in his hand. He looked at the cap on the counter. It was just fabric, thread. But it represented something unbreakable. The response came minutes later. A series of short, coded beeps. Elias flipped the phone open again. The screen showed a simple text string, "Rekt. Standing by. Report." Elias began to type, his thumb surprisingly quick on the small keypad. He reported the incident, the players, the potential threat level. He didn't ask for help, not exactly. He reported, as a senior NCO reports to his command structure, outlining the situation and his assessment. Another coded response flashed on the screen, "Understood. Sitrep acknowledged. Asset availability review in progress. Awaiting your request for support element composition." Elias closed the phone. They understood. They were assessing resources. They were waiting for him to tell them who he needed. It wasn't just a call. It was that call. The call he hadn't made in years, the call that connected him to a network of individuals whose loyalty and capabilities were beyond question. Individuals who had once followed him into hell and back. The vultures thought they were dealing with an old man. They were wrong. They were dealing with Sergeant Major Elias Thorne. And Sergeant Major Thorne had a network. Tell us, where are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments below. If you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel and come back tomorrow, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Elias spent the next day preparing. He wasn't waiting for the vultures to make the next move, he was anticipating it. He checked his supplies, not just for the gas station, but for personal readiness. Canned goods, water, a first aid kit. He cleaned and organized his small, Spartan living quarters behind the store. He also checked on his limited arsenal. Nothing extensive, just what was legally allowed and necessary for personal defense in a remote location. A reliable shotgun, a handgun. He cleaned them meticulously, his movements economical, practiced. These weren't tools of aggression for him, but instruments of final resort. His mind, however, was his primary weapon. He replayed the incident, analyzing the vultures. Hammer, brute force, easily provoked, overconfident. Shiv, cowardly, vicious when he thought he had the advantage. The others, followers, varying levels of experience but united by their gang mentality. They were predictable in their reliance on intimidation and overwhelming numbers against softer targets. Against someone who fought back effectively, they'd be less predictable, driven by wounded pride and anger. The intel on the vultures suggested they controlled territory extending several towns over, involved in low-level crime, protection rackets, petty theft, maybe some minor drug distribution. They weren't a cartel, but they were organized enough to leverage fear and numbers. They likely had a central clubhouse, maybe some key lieutenants who managed operations in different areas. The sun set again. No vultures returned. They were planning, he knew. Gathering their strength, probably calling in more muscle from neighboring chapters. They wouldn't come back 6 strong. They'd come back with a significant force. He got another coded message that evening. Asset review complete. Multiple elements available. Specify requirement. Elias thought for a moment. He didn't need an army. He needed precision. He needed experienced operators who understood combined arms, reconnaissance, security, and direct action. He needed men who were utterly reliable, who trusted his judgment implicitly, and who could operate autonomously when necessary. He needed Marines. Specific Marines. He typed his response, requesting support element, Kilo Team veterans. Priority Alpha. Kilo Team. His team. The men he had led through some of the nastiest deployments imaginable. They had operated as a tight, lethal unit, anticipating each other's moves, trusting each other with their lives. They had scattered after retirement, but the bond remained. And the code still worked. The response was almost immediate. Kilo team members alerted. Acknowledge and ETA confirmation incoming. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest, not of fear, but of readiness. It had been a long time since he'd been in command. A long time since he'd felt this particular kind of anticipation. The quiet life was over. The old life, the warrior life, was stirring. Confirmation messages started trickling in over the next few hours. Simple, coded acknowledgments from men with names like Gunny, Doc, Reaper, Ghost, ETAs listed in travel time from various parts of the country. They were coming. No questions asked. Sergeant Major called, and they responded. He didn't sleep much that night. He reviewed mental maps of the area, identified potential choke points, fields of fire, defensive positions. He thought about the gas station, its vulnerabilities. It wasn't a fort, but it could be made defensible for a short time. The surrounding terrain offered possibilities for concealment and maneuver. The first of Kilo team arrived just before dawn. A nondescript sedan pulled into the lot. A man in civilian clothes, stocky, with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, got out. He looked around, his eyes scanning the tree line, the road, the building itself. His posture was relaxed, but every fiber of his being was radiating awareness. Elias opened the door. The man nodded, a slight, respectful incline of his head. Top, he said, using the old nickname for Sergeant Major. Gunny's here. Gunny, Elias replied, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. It felt good to see him. Gunny Sergeant Frank Kowalski. Master of logistics, quiet professional, absolutely dependable. They didn't hug, didn't engage in lengthy pleasantries. It wasn't their way. Gunny came inside, his eyes taking in the layout, assessing. Sitrep, Top. Elias gave him the rundown, concise and focused on actionable intelligence. The vultures, their numbers, their likely motivation for revenge, the incident yesterday. Gunny listened intently, nodding occasionally. They'll come heavy, Gunny stated when Elias finished. Need to know their pattern. Where they stage, how they move. We got eyes. Working on it, Elias said. He gestured to a back room he used as an office. We'll set up here. More members of Kilo team arrived throughout the morning, sometimes one by one, sometimes in pairs. Doc, the former corpsman, quiet and observant, carrying a large, innocent-looking duffel bag. Reaper, lean and intense, moves like a shadow even in broad daylight. Ghost, the communications and electronics specialist, already scanning frequencies on a handheld device as he walked in. Others followed, specialists in demolitions, security, reconnaissance. All in civilian clothes, arriving in rented cars or trucks that blended in. There were 8 of them in total, besides Elias. A small force, but incredibly potent. They were quiet, professional. No bravado, just focused readiness. They set up a temporary command post in Elias's office, spreading out maps, setting up encrypted communication gear, checking weapons they had discreetly brought with them. They reviewed the incident yesterday, not for blame or judgment, but to understand the enemy's first reaction. Hammer's a hothead, Gunny observed, tracing a finger on a map. Getting dropped like that, in front of his crew. His pride's gonna demand blood. He'll come back here first, Reaper stated, his voice low. Make a show of force. Teach the old man a lesson. Which means this place is a target, Doc said, looking around the main station area. Hard to defend from a determined assault. We don't defend here, Elias said, looking at the map. His eyes were sharp, the strategist in him fully engaged. We make them think we're defending here. We use this place to draw them in, then we hit them where they're vulnerable. He outlined his initial thoughts, defensive postures around the station to give the appearance of a stand, while positioning the main element elsewhere. The team listened, offering concise tactical suggestions, refining the plan. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a collaborative effort based on mutual respect and trust in Elias's overall command. As they planned, local residents started stopping by, ostensibly for gas or supplies, but their eyes lingered on Elias, some with curiosity, some with concern. The news of yesterday's incident had spread quickly through the small community. Some were scared, some were angry at the vultures, some were simply waiting to see what would happen. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the hardware store, pulled up for gas. He looked over at the unfamiliar vehicles in the lot, the serious-looking men inside. He caught Elias's eye. Elias gave him a subtle, reassuring nod. Hemlock nodded back, a flicker of understanding in his weathered face. A younger woman, Sarah, who worked at the local diner, came in for cigarettes. She had seen Shiv and the others making trouble before. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet, tinged with worry. Are you going to be all right?" Elias looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, the fear the vultures fed on. "Sarah," he said gently. "Everything is going to be all right. Just keep the diner open. Keep living your life." She hesitated, then nodded, a little bit of the tension easing from her shoulders. It was a small exchange, but it mattered. It reminded Elias who and what he was fighting for. Through discreet observation and Ghost's electronic surveillance, they began to build a picture of the vultures' movements. They were gathering at their main clubhouse, about 20 miles away. Bikes coming and going, trucks loaded with what looked like supplies, or maybe weapons. More vultures arriving from other chapters. The initial 6 had been the vanguard, the main force was assembling. "They're pulling out the stops," Gunny reported, looking at Ghost's monitor. "Estimating 40, maybe 50 bikes. Plus support vehicles." Reaper, who had been out on a quiet reconnaissance run, confirmed. "Saw a flatbed loaded with dirt bikes and ATVs. And a couple of panel vans. Not just bikes." Elias nodded, his expression grim. "They're not just planning a ride by shooting. They're planning an assault. Hit the station, maybe the town. Send a message. They think they're coming to flatten an old man in a gas station," Doc said, checking the contents of his medical bag. "They don't know they're rolling into a kill zone." The plan evolved. The gas station would be the bait. Elias wouldn't be there alone. A small, visible contingent of his team would be positioned defensively, making noise, drawing attention. The rest of Kilo team would be positioned along the vultures' likely approach routes, using the terrain for cover and concealment. The dirt bikes and ATVs suggested the vultures plan to fan out, perhaps bypass the main road, come in through the fields or woods. Kilo team would be ready for that. They worked through the day, quietly, efficiently. Recon teams went out, mapping terrain, identifying potential ambush points, setting up observation posts. Communication lines were tested. Contingency plans were discussed and refined. This wasn't about revenge for Elias. It was about stopping the vultures. About removing a malignant presence that was stifling this quiet community with fear and intimidation. It was about justice, delivered the hard way, because the easy way, calling the compromised local authorities, wasn't an option. As dusk settled, Elias sat with Gunny, looking over the map. The pins and lines marked vulture locations, approach vectors, allied positions. It looked like a military operation, scaled down, but with the same level of detail and professionalism. "You ready for this, Top?" Gunny asked, his voice quiet. Elias looked at the map, then out the window at the darkening landscape. The peace he had found here was fragile. It had to be defended. "They broke the peace, Gunny," Elias said, his voice steady. "Now they pay the price. The vultures would make their move soon. Elias could feel it. The air felt different, tighter. The quiet of the countryside was holding its breath. The next morning, a different kind of vehicle arrived. Not an unassuming car, but a heavily modified pickup truck, painted in a drab, non-military color, but clearly built for rugged terrain. Two men got out. They moved with the same quiet competence as the others, but with a different air about them. These were not Kilo team. They were specialists. Top, the taller of the two said, a man whose face seemed carved from granite. Requesting check-in. Code Oscar Mike. Elias stepped out to meet them. Oscar Mike acknowledged, Elias replied. You're early, Shadow. And Ghost? Traffic was light, Shadow replied, a flicker of something that might have been a smile in his eyes. And Ghost wanted to make sure the birds were singing on key. He gestured to Ghost, not the Kilo team tech expert, but a different Ghost, the former signal intelligence and electronic warfare operator. This Ghost was already setting up equipment in the back of the pickup. These were assets Elias hadn't requested, but the asset availability review must have determined they were needed. Shadow was a former reconnaissance expert, Ghost a master of electronic disruption. They were there to provide early warning and hinder vulture communications. Intel confirms increased activity at the clubhouse, Shadow reported. They're definitely consolidating. Looks like they're staging for a move tonight or early tomorrow. Elias nodded. That fits the pattern. They'll want to hit us hard and fast, preferably under cover of darkness or false dawn. The plan was finalized. Kilo team members took up their positions. A small, visible force remained at the gas station, Gunny, Doc, and two others, making it look like a handful of determined men were dug in. Elias, Shadow, Ghost, the Kilo team tech, and the rest of the team would be positioned off-site, ready to intercept the vultures on their likely flanking routes. Reaper and Ghost, the SIGINT specialist, would provide overwatch and early warning. Elias walked through the gas station one last time before heading to his command post. He checked the boarded-up windows, the sandbags they'd placed discreetly around the pumps and building. It looked less like a fortress and more like someone trying to protect their property, which was part of the deception. He paused by his counter, looking at the faded cap. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. So much history in this simple piece of cloth. So much pain, so much sacrifice, so much brotherhood. And now, it was the unintended catalyst for another fight. He put the cap on. It felt right. It felt like himself. The self he had tried to leave behind, but which was still very much a part of him. He joined Shadow and the others at their primary ambush location, nestled in a copse of trees overlooking a firebreak road the vultures might use to bypass the main highway approach. The waiting began. Hours crawled by. The tension in the air was a palpable thing, a silent pressure that settled over the landscape. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal sound, was amplified, scrutinized. The professionals of Kilo team were stone statues, utterly still, listening, watching. Just before midnight, Ghost, the SIGINT specialist, spoke into his comms, his voice low and calm. Movement detected. Large group mobilizing from clubhouse. Looks like primary element is mobile. Reaper, from his overwatch position on a hill overlooking the vulture clubhouse, confirmed. Confirmed. Bikes and support vehicles rolling out. Looks like the main force. Estimated 40+ bikes, 3 vans, 1 truck. Primary vector. Elias asked into his comms. Split, Shadow reported. Main element looks highway bound, heading your way, Top. But a significant number of bikes, maybe 15, plus the dirt bikes and ATVs, peeled off onto county roads. Heading into the rougher terrain. Looks like they plan a pincer. They think we're bottled up at the station, Gunny's voice came over the comms from the gas station. They're committing. Good, Elias said. Execution is green. Kilo Team, positions. Hold fire until ordered. Ghost, keep the airwaves clean. Shadow, confirm secondary element vector. The trap was sprung. The vultures, confident in their numbers and their plan to hit the gas station from two directions, were rolling into a carefully constructed series of kill zones and interdiction points. They were coming for the old man in the faded cap, bringing overwhelming force. They had no idea they were riding into a wall of seasoned, professional operators who had been anticipating their every move. The first engagement happened miles away from the gas station, along the county road the vulture's flanking element was using. Kilo Team members positioned there, waited until the vultures were entering a narrow stretch bordered by dense woods. Contact, 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 a voice crackled over the comms. Engaging secondary element. It wasn't a frontal assault. Kilo Team used the terrain, hitting the vultures with precision fire from concealed positions, targeting tires, engines, making bikes uncontrollable. They weren't aiming for mass casualties, but for disruption and neutralization. The element of surprise was total. Chaos erupted among the vultures. Bikes skidded, crashed. Men yelled in surprise and pain. They tried to return fire, but they were exposed, silhouetted, and had no idea where the shots were coming from. The dirt bikes and ATVs tried to scatter into the woods, but Kilo Team members on foot, using their superior field craft, hunted them down, disabling vehicles, capturing or neutralizing the riders. Meanwhile, Ghost, the SIGINT specialist, was working his magic, jamming vulture radio frequencies, disrupting their communications. They couldn't coordinate, couldn't call for help effectively. Their numerical advantage was negated by Kilo Team's planning, positioning, and precision. Back at the gas station, Gunny and his small crew could hear the distant sounds of the engagement, faint pops and crashes carrying on the night air. They maintained their defensive posture, waiting. Primary element still on approach, highway vector, Shadow reported from his position. They're slowing down. Heard the noise, losing comms. They're spooked. They know something's wrong, Elias said. They'll hesitate. Maybe split again, maybe pull back. Or maybe Hammer's pride will push them forward. It was Hammer's pride that won. He decided the noise was just local law enforcement, maybe a lucky shot. He believed the main force, his force, was unstoppable. He ordered his men to push on, faster. As the main vulture element approached the gas station, they spread out, preparing for their pincer movement, only to find their secondary force wasn't there. They were alone. And as they got closer, the gas station appeared less like an easy target and more like a deliberate, subtle trap. They saw the sandbags, the boarded windows. Just as they were about to converge on the station, Elias gave the order. Primary element approaching target area. Engage. Kilo Team members positioned along the highway approach, concealed in ditches and brush, opened fire. Again, targeting vehicles, disabling engines, causing crashes. It wasn't a sustained firefight, but a sudden, devastating ambush designed to break the vultures' formation and morale. Bikes swerved violently, piling into each other. Men were thrown. Tires blew out. The coordinated charge dissolved into pandemonium. Hammer roared in frustration and rage. He saw his force melting away before it even reached the target. He saw his men scattering, falling. He focused his fury on the gas station. He believed the old man was in there, directing this. With me, he bellowed to the few vultures still mobile and near him. Charge the station. Get the old man. A desperate, smaller force followed Hammer, roaring towards the gas station. Gunny and his crew were ready. They didn't try to stop the charge outright. They used directed fire, forcing the bikes to swerve, channelizing them into narrower approaches they had prepared. They threw caltrops, blew tires, forced the charge to bleed speed and riders. Hammer, driven by blind rage, somehow made it through the gauntlet, reaching the gas station lot with a handful of battered, demoralized riders. He skidded to a halt, kicking his bike stand down with a crash. He ripped off his helmet, sweat and fury on his face. "Thorne," he roared into the relative quiet of the station lot. "Come out here, you coward." The front door of the gas station opened slowly. Not Gunny, but Elias Thorne stepped out. He wasn't hiding. He stood there in the floodlights of the station, the faded cap still on his head, his expression calm, resolute. "You brought a lot of men," Elias said, his voice carrying clearly. "Didn't help you much." Hammer snarled, pulling a large hunting knife from his boot. "You think you won, old man? You crippled my club. I'm gonna carve that smirk off your face." The few vultures remaining with Hammer hesitated. They had seen what this old man could do, and their confidence was shattered. They looked from their enraged leader to the impossibly calm figure before them. "Your club brings nothing but pain," Elias said, taking a slow step forward. "You earn respect with character, Hammer. Not with fear." Hammer roared again and charged, knife held low. He was fast for his size, but predictable. Elias didn't wait for him this time. He moved. It was a dance of death, brutal and efficient. Elias moved inside Hammer's reach, too close for the knife to be effective. He blocked a wild slash, the metal scraping against his arm guard, discreetly hidden under his sleeve. He drove a hard punch into Hammer's gut, forcing the big man to double over. As Hammer gasped for air, Elias executed a textbook armbar, leveraging his weight and position with brutal precision. A sickening crack echoed in the lot. Hammer screamed, a sound of pure agony, dropping the knife. The remaining vultures watched in horror. Their seemingly invincible leader, defeated again, broken, by an old man. Elias released the arm, letting Hammer fall to the ground, cradling his obviously shattered limb. Elias stepped back, breathing slightly harder now, but still controlled. "It's over, Hammer," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. At that moment, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Not the compromised local sheriff, but state police cruisers, followed by ambulances. Ghost, the SIGINT specialist, had not just been jamming vulture comms, he had also discreetly alerted state authorities once the engagement was clearly decisive and the vultures were neutralized or routed. He had provided them with precise locations of downed bikers and vehicles, framing it as a major highway incident and related skirmishes resulting from gang activity. Members of Kilo Team began emerging from their concealed positions, securing downed vultures, ensuring no one was seriously injured beyond incapacitation or minor wounds, and rendering first aid where needed, thanks to document. They moved with the same quiet efficiency they had shown throughout the night. The few vultures left standing at the station dropped their meager weapons, holding their hands up. They were finished. As the state police cruisers pulled into the lot, their lights flashing, the officers looked confused. They saw wrecked bikes, a handful of civilians standing over a larger group of disheveled, injured bikers, and one old man in a faded cap calmly walking towards them. Elias met the lead officer, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. He held out his hand, palm forward, clearly unarmed. "Officer," he said. "Sergeant Major Elias Thorne. United States Marine Corps, retired. These men are members of the Iron Vultures motorcycle gang. They attempted an armed assault on my business and the surrounding area. We neutralized the threat." The officer looked at the scene, the precise way the vultures were contained, the lack of significant injury beyond incapacitation, the calm professionalism of the civilians now securing the area. She looked at Elias Thorne, at his steady gaze, his quiet authority. This wasn't a random shootout. This was an operation. "Sergeant Major," she said, her voice showing a dawning understanding and respect. "What exactly happened here?" Elias gave her a concise, factual report. He didn't embellish. He explained the vultures' initial harassment, their return in force, and how he and a few friends who happened to be in the area, had defended themselves and the community. He omitted the specific details of Kilo Team's tactical deployment and capabilities, framing it as a coordinated civilian defense against a criminal attack. His team members backed his story, their accounts consistent and professional. The state police took over, securing the vultures, calling for more transport. Ambulances arrived, tending to the injured bikers, including Hammer and Shiv. As the first rays of dawn touched the sky, casting a golden light over the scene of the previous night's conflict, Elias stood watching the vultures being loaded into police vans. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by pain, fear, and bitter resentment. They had come to teach an old man a lesson, and they had learned a far more profound one themselves. Respect wasn't taken. It was earned. And they hadn't earned an ounce of it. With the situation under control and the vultures being processed, Kilo Team began their quiet departure. Just as they had arrived, they faded away, shaking Elias's hand, offering quiet nods of respect. "Good fight, Top," Gunny said, a rare smile on his face. "Always a pleasure, Gunny," Elias replied. Doc gave him a quick, professional check. "You took a scrape on that arm, Top. Keep it clean." "Will do, Doc." Reaper just nodded, his intense gaze acknowledging the job done. Ghost, the tech, packed up his gear. Shadow and Ghost, the SIGINT specialist, melted away first, their job of disruption and early warning complete. Soon, only Elias remained with the state police, giving his statement. He answered their questions honestly, within the bounds of what was necessary. They understood he was a man with unique skills and a past he wasn't fully disclosing, but the outcome was undeniable. A dangerous criminal element had been neutralized, likely saving the community from significant harm. The news spread quickly. By midday, reporters were descending on the gas station. Local residents came by, not just for gas, but to express their relief, their gratitude. The fear that had hung over the town like a shroud for months, years, was gone. Old Man Hemlock from the hardware store showed up with a new sign, "Iron Vultures Not Welcome." He hammered it onto a post near the entrance. Sarah from the diner brought a tray of coffee and sandwiches for Elias and the remaining officers. People smiled more freely, stood a little taller. Elias stood watching them, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. He hadn't sought this fight, but he hadn't shied away from it either. He had used the skills he had honed over a lifetime, not for conquest or glory, but to protect his quiet corner of the world and the good people in it. He saw the way people looked at him now, not just an old man running a gas station, but the man who stood up, the man with the quiet strength, the man in the faded cap that now seemed less like an old relic and more like a symbol of unwavering resolve. He went back inside, wiped down the counter. The gas station was a little battered, a few bullet holes in the signage, gravel churned up in the lot. But it was still standing. It was still his. He picked up the cap from the counter, ran his thumb over the worn fabric. He hadn't worn it for show. He wore it because it was part of him. Part of the identity he had forged in the crucible of service. He put it back on his head. The quiet returned to the gas station in the days that followed, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of stagnation or fear, but the quiet of peace earned, of security restored. The cicadas still sang, the wind still sighed, but the air felt lighter. The vultures were gone. Hammer and his lieutenants were facing serious charges. Their regional network was disrupted, their reputation for invincibility shattered. Other communities that had been suffering under their thumb found courage, and law enforcement, no longer facing a unified, feared enemy, were able to move in and clean up the remnants. Elias went back to his routine. Pumping gas, checking oil, wiping counters. But his interactions with the customers had changed. There was a new depth to the nods, a new warmth in the smiles. People lingered a moment longer, wanting to talk, to thank him. He accepted their gratitude with quiet humility, always deflecting praise towards the community's own resilience. He received one last coded message on his flip phone a week later. Operation secure. All assets redeployed. Stand by for future requirement. Well done, Sergeant Major. Echo. Echo. His old call sign. A brief, professional acknowledgement from the command structure that still watched over its own. He closed the phone. Kilo team was gone, back to their scattered lives. But they were still connected. Still ready. He looked out the window at the peaceful landscape. The sun was setting, just like it had on the day the vultures arrived. But this time, the shadows felt different. They felt like evening shadows, not looming threats. He knew the world wasn't perfectly safe. There would always be trouble, always bullies. But he also knew that there were people willing to stand against it. Quiet people, underestimated people, people with skills honed in the service of something larger than themselves. People who wore their history, whether on their head or in their hearts. He was one of those people. He had tried to leave the fight behind, to find peace. But sometimes, the fight found you. And when it did, you stood your ground. You drew on the strength within, the strength forged in uniform, the strength of the bonds you had made. You stood for what was right. And sometimes, if you were lucky, and if you had the right friends, the Marines arrived. And that made all the difference. Up next you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.